I'm Rosalind, 32 years old, and I spent 9 years of my life building an AI system that made NeuroSync Technologies billions. My reward being fired in a sterile conference room while executives who barely understood my code claimed my work as theirs. When they finished their rehearsed speech, I simply said, "Thanks for the opportunity," and walked out. What they didn't realize, I personally owned the patents to the most critical components. 7 days later, I sold those patents to their biggest competitor for $809 million. Before I tell you how I turned the worst day of my professional life into my greatest victory, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you want more stories about standing up for yourself when corporate America tries to steal your genius. I grew up in a modest Portland neighborhood where my parents worked multiple jobs to make ends meet. From an early age, I showed an unusual aptitude for mathematics and logic puzzles. My high school computer science teacher, Mrs. Fletcher, was the first person who recognized my potential. She stayed after school for hours, helping me learn to code eventually, encouraging me to apply to MIT despite my family's financial limitations. When I received a full scholarship, I cried for the first time in years. College was transformative. I thrived in the competitive environment, graduating at the top of my class with a double major in computer science and artificial intelligence. My thesis on neural network adaptation caught the attention of several major tech companies, but one smaller firm pursued me with particular persistence. NeuroSync Technologies was barely 3 years old when Maxwell Thompson, the charismatic CEO with piercing blue eyes and a Steve Jobs-like intensity, flew to Boston personally to recruit me. Over dinner at an expensive restaurant I could never have afforded on my own, he painted a vision of the future that resonated deeply with my ambitions. "We're not just building another tech company, Rosalind Maxwell," said, swirling his wine glass. "We're creating the systems that will fundamentally transform how humans interact with artificial intelligence. You won't just be an employee. You'll be a founding architect of that revolution." His words felt like destiny. The salary they offered was modest compared to Google or Amazon, but the equity package was substantial. And more importantly, Maxwell promised creative freedom that the bigger companies couldn't match. When I arrived at NeuroSync's offices in Palo Alto in January 2016, the company consisted of just 27 employees working in an open loft space with exposed brick walls and too many whiteboards to count. The energy was electric. People worked passionately, often late into the night, fueled by a shared belief that we were building something revolutionary. I immediately bonded with Emily Rodriguez, a brilliant data scientist whose desk faced mine. With curly hair always pulled into a messy ponytail and a collection of science-themed coffee mugs, Emily became not just a colleague but my closest friend. She had a way of explaining complex ideas with disarming simplicity and humor that made even our most stressful days bearable. "The code doesn't hate you personally," she would joke when I hit frustrating bugs. "It's just very particular about syntax and grammar, like an English professor who never sleeps." My relationship with Jackson Reed, the company's CTO, was more complicated. Tall and lean with a perpetually furrowed brow, Jackson was undeniably brilliant but difficult to work with. He had a reputation for brutal criticism in code reviews and little patience for explanations. Yet despite his prickly exterior, he recognized my talent and became something of a mentor, pushing me harder than anyone else. "If you can defend your ideas against my objections," he told me, after a particularly heated design review, "they'll stand up against any scrutiny in the market." Those early days were exhausting but exhilarating. I routinely worked 80-hour weeks, often sleeping on the office couch rather than going home to my sparsely furnished apartment. The company provided meals, laundry service, and even massage therapists to keep us functioning. My entire life became NeuroSync. Looking back, there were warning signs even then. The way Maxwell would casually mention our IP when discussing my individual innovations. How Jackson would sometimes present my ideas in executive meetings without attribution. The subtle shift in language from your project to the company's initiative in official communications. But I dismissed these concerns, attributing them to normal corporate behavior. After all, we were a team and I believed with absolute conviction in our collective mission. I trusted Maxwell's vision and Jackson's technical leadership. I felt valued, important part of something bigger than myself. I couldn't have imagined that the company I was helping build would one day betray me so completely, or that my naive trust would both nearly destroy me and paradoxically lead to my greatest triumph. But that understanding would come much later, after years of dedication that gradually transformed into disillusionment. The idea for Neurosense came to me 18 months after joining Neurosync during a weekend hackathon. While most teams focused on incremental improvements to existing products, I became obsessed with a more fundamental question. What if an AI system could predict human behavior by integrating multiple data streams in a way that mimicked intuition? Traditional predictive models analyzed patterns in isolation, purchasing history, browsing behavior, location data. My breakthrough was developing an architecture that integrated these disparate data sources, the way human intuition naturally connects seemingly unrelated observations. The potential applications were staggering: marketing, healthcare, finance, security. When I presented the concept to Jackson with pages of hastily scrawled equations and flowcharts, he stared at me silently for so long I thought he hated it. Finally, he nodded once. "This could be the foundation of everything we do next," he said quietly. "Start assembling a team." The technical challenges were immense. We needed to build neural networks that could process unstructured data from diverse sources, recognize patterns across different types of information, and generate predictions with actionable accuracy. Existing frameworks couldn't handle what we were attempting, so I had to develop new algorithms and architectures. I recruited Emily first, then added 4 other developers. We worked in a separate space we called the Cave, a windowless conference room with walls completely covered in whiteboards filled with equations, pseudocode, and architectural diagrams. The first 6 months were filled with failures. Our early models produced nonsensical results, or crashed completely when processing real-world data. The board was getting impatient, and I overheard arguments between Maxwell and Jackson about whether the project should be continued. The breakthrough came at 3 in the morning when I'd been working for 20 hours straight. I realized we were structuring the data hierarchically when we should be creating a more fluid associative network similar to human memory. I rewrote the core algorithm in a fevered state, barely stopping to eat or drink. 3 days later, our test runs showed a 40% improvement in predictive accuracy. Within 2 weeks, we had surpassed the performance of every competing system on the market. As Neurosense evolved from concept to functioning product, the company around us changed too. Neurosync grew from 27 employees to over 200. We moved from our lovably shabby loft to a sleek office building with security guards and keycard access. Maxwell hired executives from Google, Amazon, and Apple, bringing corporate structure to our once freewheeling startup. Among these new hires was Alexander Hayes, a smooth-talking VP of Business Development, with perfectly tailored suits, and a Stanford MBA. Alexander immediately recognized Neurosense's potential and became its biggest internal champion, though he understood little about how it actually worked. "This is a $10 billion product," he declared in meetings. "We need to protect it at all costs." His words made me uneasy. While I shared his belief in Neurosense's value, his focus was entirely on monetization and competitor exclusion rather than technological advancement. I began noticing subtle changes in how my work was documented and attributed. That's when I started taking precautions. Each night, I backed up my research notes and code iterations to personal storage. I documented my specific contributions and innovations with timestamps. Most importantly, I consulted a patent attorney friend who advised me to file personal patents on certain key innovations that I had developed independently, often on weekends or late nights. This wasn't about betraying the company. I remained fully committed to Neurosync's success. It was about protecting my intellectual legacy in an environment that was becoming increasingly corporate and impersonal. Meanwhile, my relationship with Jackson grew strained. As Neurasense gained internal recognition, he began presenting its advancements to the board without including me in the meetings. In company-wide emails, he referred to it as our breakthrough technology without mentioning my name. When I confronted him, he dismissed my concerns. We're all on the same team, Rosalind. Individual credit isn't how corporate leadership works, he said, not meeting my eyes. The demands of the project took a personal toll as well. My boyfriend Brad, a teacher I'd been dating for 2 years, finally ended our relationship after I missed his birthday dinner to solve a critical system bug. I'm not competing with an algorithm for your attention, he said as he packed his things from my apartment. Call me when you remember there's a real world outside that office. I barely had time to process the breakup. Neurasense had become more than a project. It was my baby, the culmination of everything I had learned and created. I poured every ounce of my creativity and intelligence into perfecting it, often at the expense of sleep, relationships, and even my health. By the time we prepared for the official launch, Neurasense could predict consumer purchasing decisions with 87% accuracy, far surpassing any competitor. We had secured preliminary contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies for beta testing. The future looked limitless. Yet even as we approached this triumph, I began noticing troubling signs. Meeting invitations that mysteriously excluded me. Conversations between Maxwell Jackson and Alexander that abruptly ended when I approached. Emily reporting that my name was being mentioned in meetings I wasn't invited to. I tried to focus on the technology and ignore the politics. Neurasense was changing the industry, and I was proud to be its creator regardless of who got the public credit. But a growing knot of anxiety formed in my stomach as I sensed that something was happening behind the scenes. Something that would change everything. 3 years after the initial conception of Neurasense, Neurosync Technologies had transformed from a promising startup to an industry powerhouse. Our valuation exceeded $2 billion, and we had grown to over 500 employees spread across 3 countries. The original open office layout had been replaced with traditional corporate hierarchy. Executive suites on the top floor, middle management on the second, and the engineering teams in an open-plan basement that ironically received the least natural light. Neurasense was now handling data for dozens of major clients, generating over 70% of the company's revenue. Magazine articles hailed it as revolutionary and industry-defining, though increasingly these stories mentioned Neurosync and Maxwell Thompson without acknowledging the team that had actually built the system. As the company expanded, a wave of new executives arrived, each bringing their own agenda and vision. Among them was Camilla Parker, a former marketing executive from a major tech firm who became our new chief marketing officer. With her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and collection of designer suits, Camilla approached Neurasense not as a technological achievement but as a product to be packaged and sold. From our first interaction, I sensed her hostility. During a presentation where I explained how the system worked, she interrupted repeatedly with marketing questions, growing visibly frustrated with my technical explanations. Customers don't care about algorithms, they care about outcomes, she said dismissively. Let's focus on the benefits, not the mechanics. It was a reasonable marketing perspective, but her tone conveyed something deeper. A fundamental disrespect for the technical work that made those outcomes possible. Gradually, I found myself excluded from key meetings about Neurasense's future. Decisions about feature priorities and development roadmaps that should have included me as the chief architect were made without my input. When I raised concerns with Jackson, he deflected. We need to streamline decision-making now that we're at scale, he explained. You should focus on technical implementation, not business strategy. The alliance between Maxwell Jackson and Alexander grew increasingly apparent. They began to function as a triumvirate, holding private meetings and making decisions that the rest of us learned about after the fact. Emily, whose office was near the executive suite, reported overhearing fragments of their conversations. They keep talking about restructuring the technical division and preparing for the next phase, she told me over lunch. And I've heard your name mentioned several times, never in a context that sounds good. The situation came to a head during a heated argument about implementation changes that would have compromised Neurosense's core functionality. Alexander had promised a major banking client that we could modify the system to work with their legacy database structure, a change that would have sacrificed predictive accuracy for convenience. This is absolutely unacceptable, I argued in the meeting. The entire value of Neurosense lies in its predictive power. These modifications would reduce accuracy by at least 30%. The client is worth $40 million annually, Alexander countered smoothly. Surely you can find a technical workaround. There isn't a workaround for mathematical reality, I snapped. Either we maintain the system's integrity or we're selling snake oil. The room fell silent. Jackson, who should have backed me up as CTO, stared down at his notebook. Maxwell finally broke the tension. Alexander scheduled a follow-up with the client to reset expectations. Rosalind, prepare a detailed explanation of the technical limitations we can present to them. I had won the battle, but at significant cost. The dynamic had shifted. I was no longer viewed as a visionary creator, but as an obstacle to business objectives. In the weeks that followed, my relationship with former allies grew increasingly strained. Team members who had once sought my guidance now directed their questions to Jackson, instead, clearly sensing the shifting power dynamics. Emily remained loyal, but even she became cautious about being seen as too closely aligned with me. During company happy hours, the executive team clustered together, while I found myself increasingly isolated, watching the company I had helped build evolve into something I barely recognized. You need to watch your back, Emily warned one evening as we worked late. I overheard Alexander telling Camilla that once the Neurosense 2.0 roadmap is finalized, they're planning to restructure the founding technical team. That means you. I didn't want to believe her, but too many signs pointed toward the same conclusion. My security clearance was quietly downgraded, limiting my access to certain parts of the codebase. My one-on-one meetings with Maxwell became shorter and less frequent, eventually disappearing from the calendar altogether. I began taking additional precautions. I documented every contribution I had made to the system, saved emails that demonstrated my role in key innovations, and most importantly, continued to secure patents for specific algorithms and methodologies I had developed, independently. As the company prepared for a major public offering based on Neurosense's success, I realized with growing clarity that my position was precarious. The people I had trusted with my career, my creativity, and 9 years of my life were systematically preparing to push me out. The only question was when the axe would fall and whether I could protect myself before it did. In the spring of 2023, preparations for NeuroSync's initial public offering kicked into high gear. Investment bankers in expensive suits became a common sight in our offices, and conference rooms were perpetually booked for strategic planning sessions to which I was rarely invited. Neurosense was positioned as the crown jewel of the company's portfolio, projected to generate over 80% of future revenue. The target valuation was an ambitious $6 billion, largely predicated on our AI system's market-leading position. One Tuesday morning, I received a company-wide email announcing a major press event to showcase Neurosense to technology journalists. Scrolling through the agenda, I noticed something strange. My name was nowhere to be found. The presentation credits listed Jackson as chief architect and Alexander as product visionary. Even junior team members who had joined years after the system's creation were mentioned, but I had been completely erased. I printed the document and marched directly to Maxwell's office, interrupting a meeting with 2 investment bankers. I need to speak with you, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. It's urgent. Maxwell's smile remained fixed, but his eyes flashed with annoyance. Gentlemen, would you excuse us for a moment? When the bankers left, his demeanor changed instantly. That was incredibly unprofessional, Rosalind. I slapped the printout on his desk. More unprofessional than erasing the principal creator of Neurosense from the company narrative I built this system. It exists because of my work, my ideas, my leadership. Maxwell's expression hardened as he glanced at the document. The company is entering a new phase. We need to present a unified executive team to investors. Jackson has seniority as CTO and better presentation skills for this audience. This isn't about presentation skills. This is systematic erasure of my contributions. First from meetings, now from public recognition. What's next? Maxwell. He leaned back in his chair, studying me with cold calculation that contrasted sharply with the warm charisma that had once recruited me. You've made significant contributions, and your compensation reflects that. But NeuroSense is a company product built on company time with company resources. Individual attributions aren't relevant to our business objectives at this stage. The conversation left me shaking with anger and anxiety. Back at my desk, I discovered another disturbing development. My access permissions to several research directories had been revoked. Files containing my own work were suddenly unavailable to me. That afternoon, I encountered Samantha Wong, one of the company's legal counsel, in the break room. Samantha and I weren't close, but she had always been professional and fair in our limited interactions. As she waited for the coffee machine, she spoke without looking at me. If I were developing proprietary technology, I'd make sure I had independent documentation of my contributions, she said quietly, especially before any major corporate transitions. Before I could respond, she took her coffee and walked away, but the message was clear. Something was happening behind the scenes, and at least one person felt concerned enough to warn me. That evening, I called Michelle Daniels, a technology attorney I had consulted when filing my personal patents. I explained the situation and asked for an emergency meeting. Bring every document you have, she advised. Emails, code, commits, meeting notes, performance reviews, and most importantly, bring the patent documentation. For the next 3 nights, I barely slept, combing through 9 years of files, organizing evidence of my role in creating NeuroSense. The more I compiled, the clearer the pattern became, a systematic effort to diminish my contributions while preparing for the IPO. The company needed a clean narrative with established executives at the center, not a somewhat awkward female engineer who didn't fit the polished image they wanted to present to Wall Street. My anxiety manifested physically. I developed insomnia, lost 10 pounds in 2 weeks, and found myself jumping whenever my phone rang. Emily noticed my deterioration and grew increasingly concerned. "You look terrible," she said bluntly over lunch. "What's going on?" I trusted Emily completely, but involving her could put her own position at risk. "Just IPO stress," I deflected. "How are things on your end?" She hesitated, then lowered her voice. "There's been talk about restructuring after the public offering. Alexander's building a new technical team focused on future directions for NeuroSense. Your name hasn't come up in the planning." The confirmation of my fears should have been devastating, but instead it brought a strange clarity. The company I had helped build, the people I had trusted, were planning to discard me like an obsolete component. The betrayal crystallized my determination to protect myself and my work. Meeting with Michelle confirmed my legal position was stronger than I'd hoped. The patents I had independently filed covered crucial aspects of NeuroSense's functionality, innovations I had developed often on weekends or late nights, documenting carefully that they were not part of my assigned work duties. "These patents give you significant leverage," Michelle explained. "The company may claim ownership based on your employment, but they'd have to prove these specific innovations fell under your work obligations. The documentation you've maintained creates substantial ambiguity in your favor." As we developed a strategic response plan, disaster struck from an unexpected direction. While working late one evening, I received an email clearly intended for another recipient. Alexander had accidentally included me on a thread discussing the technical transition plan following the IPO. The language was explicit. "Once the offering closes, we'll implement the restructuring. Rosalind's role will be eliminated as redundant to the new architecture team. Legal is preparing separation documents with enhanced confidentiality provisions, critical to manage this transition without disruption to client confidence or market perception." I forwarded the email to my personal account before it could be remotely deleted, then sat in stunned silence in the empty office. The betrayal was no longer a suspicion, but a documented plan. The company I had given 9 years of my life to was plotting my removal like a defective part to be replaced. That night, I finalized my contingency plan with Michelle. We identified 3 potential paths forward depending on how events unfolded. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly the situation would come to a head, or how completely my preparation would turn the tables on those who thought they were holding all the cards. The morning it happened began like any other. I arrived at the office at 7:30, stopped for coffee in the break room, and settled at my desk to review code submissions from the overseas team. There was a strange atmosphere, though. Conversations stopped when I walked by. People avoided eye contact. At 9:15, a calendar invitation appeared on my screen. HR discussion. Conference room. A 9:30 a.m. No agenda, no additional attendees listed. My heart raced, but a strange calm settled over me. This was it. I spent the next 15 minutes methodically backing up critical personal notes to my encrypted cloud storage, then closed my laptop and walked to the conference room with my head high. When I entered, 4 people were waiting: Maxwell, Jackson, Diana from HR, and a man I didn't recognize who I assumed was legal counsel. Maxwell didn't stand to greet me, just gestured to an empty chair across the table. "Please have a seat, Rosalind," he said with practiced corporate detachment. Diana spoke first, her voice professionally modulated into what I called HR monotone, designed to deliver devastating news without displaying human emotion. "As the company prepares for its next growth phase, we've been evaluating organizational structure to ensure optimal alignment with strategic objectives," she began. I almost laughed at the corporate gibberish. 9 years of dedication reduced to organizational alignment. After careful consideration, she continued, "We've determined that your current role will be eliminated effective immediately." Maxwell leaned forward slightly. "The technology architecture team is being restructured under a different leadership model. Your contributions have been valuable, but the company is moving in a new direction that requires different skill sets." Jackson couldn't even look me in the eye as Maxwell spoke. He stared at his notepad occasionally, nodding in agreement. The lawyer pushed a document across the table. "This separation agreement includes 3-month severance pay conditional upon signing the included non-disclosure and non-competition agreements. You'll also be required to confirm that all intellectual property developed during your employment belongs exclusively to NeuroSync Technologies." My mind flashed to Michelle's advice. Don't sign anything in the meeting. Don't make statements about intellectual property. Don't show emotion if possible. "We'll need all company property returned immediately," Diana continued. "Your laptop access cards and any physical or digital materials related to company projects, particularly NeuroSense. Jason from security will accompany you to collect your personal items." They clearly expected tears, protests, or anger. Instead, I smiled slightly and said the only words I would speak in that meeting. "Thanks for the opportunity." The simplicity of my response clearly unsettled them. Maxwell's eyebrows rose slightly. Jackson finally looked up, confusion evident on his face. They had prepared for drama, for negotiation, for difficulty. My calm acceptance threw them off script. "You'll have until the end of the week to review the separation agreement," the lawyer said, recovering first. "I strongly advise signing it promptly to ensure continuity of benefits." I stood up, leaving the document on the table. "I'll have my attorney review it." Diana looked alarmed. "Your attorney?" "Of course," I replied evenly. "That would be standard practice, wouldn't it?" I walked out of the conference room with my head high, aware of whispers and stares as a security guard joined me at my desk. Colleagues watched in shocked silence as I collected a few personal items: family photos, a MIT coffee mug, a small plant Emily had given me for my birthday. Emily herself appeared, her face pale with shock. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Organizational realignment," I replied with just enough irony to make her understand. "They can't just." They can and they did, I interrupted gently. I'll call you later. As the security guard escorted me through the main lobby, I caught a glimpse of Alexander watching from the mezzanine, a satisfied smile playing at the corner of his mouth. 9 years of work, hundreds of innovations, countless late nights and sacrificed weekends, all ended with a security escort and not even a cardboard box for my belongings. In the parking garage, the guard awkwardly took my access card. I'm supposed to wait until you leave the premises, he said apologetically. No problem, I replied. Just doing your job. Once inside my car with the door closed and privacy at last, the calm facade I had maintained cracked. Tears came in a flood along with gasping sobs that felt torn from my chest. I allowed myself exactly 5 minutes of breakdown, setting a timer on my phone. When it chimed, I wiped my face, took 3 deep breaths, and called Michelle. It happened, I said when she answered. They terminated me this morning. Did you sign anything? No. Left the separation agreement on the table. Good. Come directly to my office. We need to move quickly. As I drove to Michelle's office, a strange sense of freedom began to replace the shock and grief. For 9 years, my identity had been tied to NeuroSync. Now I was untethered but also unburdened. And unlike what Maxwell Jackson and Alexander believed, I was far from powerless. They had calculated everything except the possibility that I had protected myself. They thought they were closing a chapter, never imagining they had just opened the door to their own undoing. In firing me, they had freed me to become their most dangerous adversary. By the time I reached Michelle's office, my phone was already filling with messages from colleagues expressing shock and support. But the most telling notification was a LinkedIn message from Rachel Morgan, CEO of Datasphere, NeuroSync's largest competitor. Heard the news. We should talk. My cell is below. The counterattack had begun before my former employers even realized there would be a battle. Michelle's office occupied the 15th floor of a downtown building with views of the bay. When I arrived, she had already assembled a small team, including Benjamin Garcia, a patent attorney she had collaborated with on several high-profile tech cases. First, I'm sorry this happened, Michelle said as we settled into her conference room. Second, based on what you've shared previously, I think you're in a much stronger position than NeuroSync realizes. Benjamin nodded in agreement, spreading several documents on the table. I've reviewed the patents you filed independently. They cover key functionalities that appear central to NeuroSense's operation, particularly the adaptive pattern recognition algorithm and the cross-contextual data integration framework. The question is, Michelle continued, did NeuroSync perform a thorough IP audit before terminating you? Do they understand which components you personally own versus what belongs to the company? Based on their cavalier attitude during my termination, I was fairly certain they had made assumptions about owning everything. Corporate arrogance often leads to oversights, and this appeared to be a significant one. Here's where we stand, Michelle explained. You developed certain key innovations outside your specific work assignments, often on your own time. You properly documented this and filed patents in your name. While NeuroSync might claim these belong to them under the broad terms of your employment agreement, that's an argument they'd have to make in court, not a foregone conclusion. Benjamin leaned forward. More importantly, any company implementing NeuroSense technology without licenses to these specific patents would be vulnerable to infringement claims, including NeuroSync itself and any of its clients. The implications were staggering. The patents I owned weren't just bargaining chips for a better severance package. They were potentially worth millions to the right buyer, and a serious liability for NeuroSync if I chose to enforce them. We have 3 options, Michelle outlined. 1. Negotiate a purchase agreement with NeuroSync for your patents. 2. Retain ownership and license them back to NeuroSync for ongoing royalties. 3. Sell them to a competitor. Each option had advantages and risks. Negotiating with NeuroSync might be simplest, but would put me back in contact with people who had betrayed me. Licensing would provide ongoing income, but tie my financial future to a company I no longer trusted. Selling to a competitor would be the most aggressive move, potentially yielding the highest immediate payout but burning bridges permanently. Let's explore all three simultaneously, I decided. Prepare valuation estimates for each scenario while I make some preliminary contacts. Over the next 48 hours, we worked nearly around the clock. I reached out to 3 companies, Datasphere, Quantum Minds, and Intellex, all major players in the AI space who competed directly with Neurosync. I didn't explicitly offer my patents yet, just indicated I was exploring new opportunities following my departure from Neurosync. All 3 responded with immediate interest. Rachel Morgan from Datasphere was particularly enthusiastic, suggesting a private dinner to discuss mutual interests in advanced predictive systems. Meanwhile, my phone began filling with increasingly urgent messages from Maxwell and Alexander. By the second day after my termination, it became clear that someone at Neurosync, likely their legal team, had finally discovered the patent situation. Please call me at your earliest convenience to discuss an important matter. Maxwell's message read his tone dramatically different from the cold dismissal in the conference room. Alexander was less subtle. We need to clear up a misunderstanding regarding IP ownership. This requires immediate attention. I ignored all their messages, focusing instead on meeting with potential buyers. The dinner with Rachel Morgan proved particularly illuminating. A former engineer herself, before moving into executive leadership, she immediately grasped both the technical value of my innovations and the strategic advantage they would provide. "Let me be direct," she said over dessert. "We've analyzed Neurosense's capabilities extensively and recognized several unique approaches that gave them significant market advantage. I suspect you're the architect of those approaches, and if you control the underlying IP, we're very interested." "And if I do?" I asked carefully. Rachel smiled. "Then Datasphere would make acquiring those rights a top priority with compensation, reflecting both their technical value and strategic importance." Similar conversations with executives from Quantum Minds and Intellex confirmed what Benjamin had suggested: my patents were worth far more than I had initially realized, particularly given the competitive dynamics of the AI market. By the 4th day, we had initial offers from all 3 companies ranging from $300 million to $550 million. Meanwhile, Neurosync escalated their attempts to contact me now, including thinly veiled legal threats. Failure to respond regarding company intellectual property may constitute breach of fiduciary duty, their general counsel wrote in a formal letter delivered to my apartment. Michelle drafted a carefully worded response. "My client disputes any claims regarding ownership of patents registered in her personal capacity. She remains open to discussing appropriate licensing arrangements should Neurosync wish to continue utilizing technologies covered by these patents." This prompted an immediate call from Maxwell himself, which I allowed Michelle to handle. "Mr. Thompson seems to have suddenly discovered the value of your contributions," she reported after the call. "He's proposing a meeting to resolve the situation amicably, and mentioned potential leadership of a new research division." "Too late," I replied. "Proceed with the competitive bidding process." What followed was one of the most intense negotiating periods of my life. As word spread through the industry about the patents in play, the offers increased dramatically. Datasphere and Quantum Minds emerged as the leading contenders, each raising their bids multiple times. Neurosync attempted to join the bidding, offering both substantial cash and equity in the post-IPO company, but their initial betrayal had severed any possibility of reconciliation. I instructed Michelle to inform them that their participation in the process was not welcome. On the 6th day after my termination, Rachel Morgan requested an in-person meeting at Datasphere headquarters. There, she presented their final offer, $809 million for exclusive rights to all my patents, plus a consulting agreement worth an additional $20 million over 3 years to help implement the technology. This represents not just the technical value Rachel explained, but the strategic advantage of keeping these patents away from Neurosync at this critical juncture before their public offering. After consulting with Michelle and Benjamin, I accepted Datasphere's offer. The contracts were drawn up overnight, with teams of lawyers working through dawn to finalize the details. On the 7th day, after being escorted from Neurosync's offices, exactly 1 week after hearing I was being eliminated for organizational alignment, I signed the final documents in Michelle's conference room. With a single signature, I became wealthy beyond anything I had imagined possible, while simultaneously dealing a devastating blow to the company that had discarded me. As we celebrated with champagne after the signing, Michelle handed me her phone. On the screen was a financial news alert. Neurosync Technologies postpones IPO amid patent controversy. Stock value of private shares plummets 40% in secondary markets. The revenge wasn't just complete, it was worth $809 million. The aftermath of the patent sale sent shockwaves through the tech industry. Neurosync immediately filed lawsuits, attempting to block the transfer, claiming the patents rightfully belonged to the company under the terms of my employment agreement. Their legal team pursued injunctions, restraining orders, and even attempted to freeze the payment from Datasphere. Michelle had anticipated these moves. We had structured the deal to withstand legal challenges with substantial documentation demonstrating that the patented innovations had been developed independently, often on weekends or late evenings, beyond my specific work responsibilities. The court ruled in our favor on the preliminary motions, denying Neurosync's requests for emergency injunctions. The full case would take years to resolve, but the immediate battle was decisively in my favor. The patents transferred successfully to Datasphere, and the payment cleared into accounts Michelle had established. The financial impact on Neurosync was devastating. Their stock value in private trading markets collapsed, as investors recognized the fundamental threat to their core technology. The IPO was indefinitely postponed, and several major clients suspended their contracts pending resolution of the intellectual property issues. Industry publications that had once heralded Maxwell Thompson as a visionary now questioned his leadership and the company's due diligence. One particularly satisfying headline read, "Neurosync's billion-dollar blunder: how overlooking a key employee's patents may have destroyed the company." While part of me took satisfaction in this vindication, I found myself reflecting more deeply on the experience and what it revealed about corporate culture, loyalty, and self-protection in the technology industry. I received dozens of messages from former colleagues at Neurosync. Many expressed shock at how I had been treated, and congratulations on my dramatic reversal of fortune. Emily was among the first to reach out. "I always knew you were brilliant," she wrote, "but this move was legendary. The office is in complete chaos. Jackson looks like he hasn't slept in days. And Maxwell is having closed-door meetings with the board that involve a lot of shouting." Emily confided that the new restructuring was claiming additional victims, with several long-time employees receiving similar termination notices. I immediately offered her a position in my new venture, along with several other colleagues whose talent I respected and who had been loyal during my time at Neurosync. With financial security beyond anything I had imagined possible, I took time to consider my next steps carefully. The consulting arrangement with Datasphere required only limited time commitment, leaving me free to pursue new projects. After several months of reflection, research, and conversations with potential collaborators, I launched Ethical AI Ventures, a company focused on developing artificial intelligence systems with built-in ethical frameworks and transparent decision-making processes. I committed $100 million of my own funds as initial capital, and assembled a diverse team of technologists, ethicists, and industry experts. The problem with most AI development, I explained in our launch presentation, isn't just technical but philosophical. We're creating increasingly powerful systems without adequate consideration of their societal impact. Ethical AI Ventures will prioritize responsibility alongside innovation. The company quickly attracted attention from organizations concerned about the unchecked power of conventional AI systems. Within a year, we had partnerships with academic institutions, nonprofit organizations, and forward-thinking corporations committed to ethical technology development. Beyond professional reinvention, I focused on healing personal relationships that had suffered during my years of single-minded dedication to Neurosync. I reconnected with family members, spending time with my parents who had recently retired, and rebuilding bonds with friends I had neglected. "I barely saw you for 9 years," my mother commented during a long weekend visit to my new home. "It's like getting my daughter back." The psychological impact of betrayal and vindication required its own healing process. I worked with a therapist specializing in workplace trauma, unpacking the complex emotions associated with giving so much of myself to a company that had ultimately viewed me as disposable. Success is the best revenge, but it doesn't automatically heal the wounds, my therapist observed. Give yourself permission to feel the full range of emotions about what happened. I rediscovered interests and passions that had been set aside during my years of intense focus on neuroscience. I took piano lessons, something I had enjoyed as a child but abandoned for lack of time. I traveled to countries I had always wanted to visit, experiencing cultures and perspectives that expanded my thinking beyond the Silicon Valley bubble. 3 years after the patent sale, I accepted an invitation to speak at a technology conference where coincidentally Maxwell Thompson was also scheduled to appear. Neurosync had survived but never recovered its former prominence. They had eventually completed a public offering at a valuation far below their original target, and were now considered a cautionary tale in tech industry case studies. Maxwell canceled his appearance when he learned I would be speaking. In his absence, I chose not to focus on the past, but on the future I was helping to build through ethical AI ventures. My talk on responsible innovation building AI that serves humanity received a standing ovation and generated significant interest in our approach. As I reflect on this journey from dedicated employee to discarded talent to vindicated innovator, several lessons stand out with particular clarity. First, loyalty in corporate environments is rarely reciprocated equally. Companies will praise dedication and sacrifice while circumstances favor them, but business decisions ultimately prioritize organizational interests over individual contributions. Second, protecting your intellectual property and documenting your achievements isn't paranoid, it's prudent. In an industry built on ideas, understanding and securing ownership of your innovations is essential self-protection. Third, true success comes not just from financial reward, but from building something meaningful that reflects your values. The wealth generated from the patent sale provided security, but creating ethical AI ventures gave me purpose. Finally, balance is not optional but essential. The single-minded focus that helped me build Neurosense came at tremendous personal cost. True achievement includes professional success, alongside personal fulfillment, meaningful relationships, and continuous growth as a complete human being, not just as a producer of value for shareholders. Today, as I lead a company committed to ensuring that artificial intelligence enhances human flourishing rather than undermining it, I'm grateful for both the triumphs and the betrayals that shaped my path. Sometimes saying thanks and walking away isn't the end of the story. It can be the beginning of something far greater than what you left behind. So what about you? Have you ever had your contributions overlooked or been pushed aside despite your dedication? How did you respond? And what lessons did you learn from the experience? Share your story in the comments below. And if you found value in my journey, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who might need to hear that setbacks can become setups for extraordinary comebacks. Thanks for listening. And remember, your greatest value isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you respond when that treatment falls short.